A scandal that involves Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Tyler Perry, a sprawling estate, and the kind of financial house of cards that would make even the most seasoned real estate attorneys raise an eyebrow. This is a story about image versus reality, about the gap between what the Sussexes want you to see and what actually appears to be true. And trust me, that gap is a chasm. In the summer of 2020, fresh off their dramatic exit from the British royal family, an exit they branded as a quest for freedom, for privacy, for a life unburdened by the crushing weight of royal expectation, Harry and Meghan purchased a home, not just any home, a 9-bedroom, 16-bathroom estate in Montecito, California. The price tag: a cool $14.65 million, later rounded up in media reports to $16 million with renovations and associated costs. The estate sits on over 7 acres. It features a tennis court, a swimming pool, a guest house, rose gardens, a tea house. Because apparently when you leave the monarchy to pursue authenticity, you still need a tea house and sprawling grounds that would make some minor European principalities blush with envy. The media dutifully reported this purchase. Architectural Digest was granted access. Meghan sat in carefully curated rooms during Zoom calls, every bookshelf styled, every cushion placed with the precision of a set designer, which, let's be honest, is essentially what it was. A set, and the world was told, look at how well they're doing. Look at this magnificent home they've purchased. They don't need the monarchy, they don't need the British taxpayer. They are thriving. That word did a lot of heavy lifting, because now, years later, the cracks aren't just showing. The entire facade appears to be crumbling. And the question that serious observers have been asking quietly for months is now being asked very, very loudly. Did Harry and Meghan ever actually own that house? To understand the present scandal, we need to rewind to a relationship that has always been. Curious, Tyler Perry, the entertainment mogul. The man who built a studio empire, who owns one of the largest production facilities in the United States. A man of genuine, extraordinary accomplishment, and also a man who in 2020 provided Harry and Meghan with a house, not the Montecito estate. Before that, when the Sussexes first arrived in North America, adrift and apparently without a clear plan, which for two people who claimed to have been strategizing their exit for months was rather telling, Tyler Perry stepped in. He offered them his Beverly Hills mansion, an 8-bedroom, 12-bathroom estate valued at approximately $18 million. He also provided his personal security team. This was, by any measure, an extraordinarily generous gesture. The kind of generosity that makes you wonder, what was the arrangement? What were the terms? Was this simply one wealthy person helping out two people he admired? Or was there something more transactional beneath the surface? Because here's what's interesting. Tyler Perry and Meghan Markle were not, by most accounts, close friends before this arrangement. They had connected, reportedly, through social media, through mutual acquaintances. Through the kind of Hollywood networking that Meghan has always excelled at, because whatever else you may say about Meghan Markle, and we will say quite a lot today, the woman knows how to work a room. Or more accurately, she knows how to work a direct message. So Tyler Perry provides a mansion. Tyler Perry provides security. And then not long after, Harry and Meghan purchased the Montecito estate. But did they purchase it? Or did someone purchase it for them? This is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. Property records in the United States are, generally speaking, public. This is one of the great democratic features of American real estate: transparency. You can look up who owns what, when it was purchased, and for how much, but there are ways to obscure ownership. Shell companies, LLCs, trust structures. And in the case of the Montecito estate, the ownership structure has raised eyebrows from the very beginning. The property was reportedly purchased through a trust. Now, in itself isn't unusual for high-profile buyers. Celebrities, politicians, wealthy individuals frequently use trusts and LLCs to maintain privacy and protect assets. But the question that has persisted, and that Tyler Perry's own financial disclosures and business dealings have now brought into sharper focus, is whether the Sussexes were the actual beneficial owners of that trust, or whether they were, in essence, occupants. residents, guests in a very expensive house that someone else was ultimately underwriting. Multiple credible reports have now emerged suggesting that the financial arrangement behind the Montecito estate is far more complex and far more dependent on outside support than the Sussexes have ever publicly acknowledged. And Tyler Perry, whether intentionally or not, has provided evidence that supports this interpretation through the paper trail, through business filings, through the kind of documentary evidence that doesn't lie, even when the people involved might prefer that it did. Now let me be clear, we are not alleging fraud, we are not suggesting illegality. What we are suggesting, what the evidence increasingly supports, is that the carefully constructed image of Harry and Meghan as independent, financially self-sufficient, post-royal success stories is fiction, expensive fiction, but fiction nonetheless, and this brings us to the renovation question. Because if the ownership situation is murky, the renovation situation is downright embarrassing. For years, there have been reports of planned renovations to the Montecito estate. Expansions, improvements, the kind of upgrades that someone who owns a $16 million property and has signed $100 million deals with Netflix and Spotify would presumably undertake without breaking a sweat. And yet, the renovations haven't happened. Or rather, they haven't happened at the scale that was repeatedly leaked to sympathetic media outlets. Now, why would that be? If you have a combined net worth that various outlets have estimated at anywhere from $30 to $60 million, though we should note that net worth estimates for the Sussexes have always been remarkably optimistic, why would you not renovate your own home? Unless, of course, it's not really your home. Unless the person or entity that actually controls the property hasn't authorized those renovations. Unless you are, in the most generous interpretation, a tenant with an extremely favorable lease and a very patient landlord. Reports from Montecito, and this is where the story takes on a particularly delicious quality for those of us who appreciate dramatic irony, suggest that within the community, the Sussexes' financial situation is something of an open secret. Let me say that again, because it bears repeating. In Montecito, California, one of the wealthiest communities in the United States, home to Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, and numerous other genuine multimillionaires and billionaires, Harry and Meghan are reportedly regarded as, and I use this term with full awareness of its devastating implications, a laughingstock. Now, Montecito is not a community that laughs easily. Or rather, it's not a community that laughs openly. These are people who have mastered the art of the polite smile, the knowing glance, the charitable interpretation offered through gritted teeth. But behind the hedgerows and the security gates, the whispers have become conversations. And the conversations have become something approaching consensus. The Sussexes, their neighbors believe, are broke, not broke in the way that you or I might understand the term. They're not choosing between heating and eating. They're not clipping coupons, but broke in the Montecito sense. Broke relative to their neighbors, broke relative to their lifestyle, and most damningly, broke relative to their own relentless self-promotion. When you live in a community where your nearest neighbor has a genuine 9-figure net worth, and you are scrambling to maintain the appearance of belonging, people notice. They notice that the grounds aren't maintained to the standard of surrounding estates. They notice that the security arrangements seem to fluctuate. They notice that the grand plans announced with such fanfare somehow never materialize. And they talk, oh they talk, because here is the fundamental problem with the Sussex strategy, and it is a problem that Meghan Markle, for all her undeniable intelligence in certain areas, has never seemed to grasp. You cannot simultaneously demand privacy and court publicity. You cannot claim to be stepping back from public life while launching podcasts, Netflix series, interview specials, and branded product lines, and you absolutely categorically cannot pretend to be wealthier than you are in a community where actual wealth is the baseline currency of social acceptance. Montecito has seen through the performance, and Montecito is not impressed, which brings us to the latest development. And it is, I must say, the most revealing one yet. Prince Harry, according to multiple reports, has been attempting to sell the Montecito estate. Now, pause on that for a moment. Let it sink in, the house that was presented to the world as the symbol of their independence. The house that was featured in Architectural Digest. The house where Meghan conducted interviews and Zoom calls with world leaders. The house that was supposed to prove, once and for all, that leaving the royal family was the right decision. Harry is trying to sell it, but here's the exquisite complication. If the reports about the ownership structure are accurate, if the property is not entirely, or even primarily, in Harry's name, then selling it isn't simply a matter of calling an estate agent and listing it on Zillow. It requires the cooperation of whoever actually holds the purse strings. It requires the agreement of whatever entity or individual is the true beneficial owner. It requires, in other words, permission. And there is something profoundly, almost poetically devastating about the image of a prince of the United Kingdom, sixth in line to the throne, grandson of the longest-reigning monarch in British history, needing to ask permission to sell a house that the world was told belonged to him. The monarchy he left required him to ask permission for certain things. Protocol, tradition. The constraints of duty, he left that behind. He chose freedom, and now he needs permission from who, exactly? Tyler Perry, a trust administrator, a financial backer whose identity remains conveniently obscured. The irony would be funny if it weren't so profoundly sad. And here we must address the architect. Because while Harry may be the one attempting to navigate this financial labyrinth, the architect of their post-royal strategy has always been Meghan. Meghan Markle, the woman who, and I say this with genuine analytical detachment, has managed to alienate virtually every person and institution she has ever been associated with, her family, her first husband, her former friends, the staff at Kensington Palace, multiple members of whom reportedly filed complaints about her behavior, the royal family, the British press, Spotify, whose executive famously called the Sussexes grifters. And now, apparently, her own neighbors in Montecito. At what point do we stop blaming everyone else and start examining the common denominator? Because the pattern is consistent. And the pattern is this: Meghan enters a situation. Meghan extracts maximum value from that situation. Social capital, financial support, media attention, brand association. And then when the situation no longer serves her purposes, or when the people involved begin to see through the performance, Meghan departs. And on departure, she invariably casts herself as the victim. She was the victim of her family. She was the victim of her first marriage. She was the victim of the palace. She was the victim of the British media. She was the victim of institutional racism. She was the victim of everything and everyone except her own choices. And the Montecito mansion situation fits this pattern with almost mechanical precision. The house was acquired through the generosity and financial support of others. It was presented to the world as evidence of independent success. And now that the truth is emerging, now that the gap between image and reality is becoming impossible to conceal, we can expect with the certainty of sunrise that Meghan will find someone to blame. It will be Harry's fault, or Tyler Perry's fault, or the media's fault, or the fault of unnamed racist forces conspiring against her. It will be everyone's fault except hers. Because in Meghan Markle's narrative, the only narrative she has ever truly committed to, she is always the heroine. And the world is always the villain. Let's talk about the money. Because understanding the financial trajectory is essential to understanding why the mansion is suddenly on the chopping block. When Harry and Meghan left the royal family, they signed 2 landmark deals. Netflix, reportedly worth around $100 million over 5 years. And Spotify, reportedly worth around $25 million. These were staggering numbers. Numbers that seemed to justify the exit. Numbers that made it possible to say, see, they don't need the monarchy. They can make it on their own. But the reality of those deals has been considerably less impressive than the headlines suggested. The Netflix deal has produced a documentary series that generated initial buzz but limited sustained engagement. It produced content that by most accounts has underperformed relative to the investment, and the Spotify deal, that ended, prematurely, with the aforementioned grifter's comment from a senior executive. a $25 million deal that apparently produced so little content of value that the platform decided cutting its losses was preferable to continuing the relationship. When Spotify calls you a grifter and walks away from a deal, that is not a minor setback. That is a catastrophic reputational event, because it tells every other potential partner, every other potential investor, every other potential collaborator, these people do not deliver. And in Hollywood, where the Sussexes have attempted to build their post-royal empire, not delivering is the one unforgivable sin. You can be difficult, you can be demanding, you can be, frankly, a terrible human being. Hollywood will tolerate all of that, provided you deliver. Harry and Meghan have not delivered, and the money, accordingly, is drying up. There's another financial dimension to this story that deserves attention, and it's security. Harry has been engaged in a prolonged legal battle with the British government over security arrangements. He wants taxpayer-funded protection when he visits the United Kingdom. The government has said no. The courts have largely agreed, but security in the United States costs money too, significant money. For a family at the profile level of the Sussexes, annual private security costs have been estimated at between $2 and $4 million per year. If your income is contracting, if your deals are ending, if your brand is deteriorating, if your mansion isn't really your mansion, then how exactly are you funding multi-million-dollar annual security costs? This is not a rhetorical question. It's a financial one, and it's a question that the Sussexes have never answered. And so we arrive at the human element, because beneath all the financial analysis and property records, there is a human being, a deeply conflicted, apparently unhappy human being, Prince Harry, a man who lost his mother at 12 years old, a man who served his country with genuine distinction in Afghanistan, a man who, whatever you think of his subsequent choices, once commanded real admiration and genuine affection from the British public. And now he is trying to sell a house that may not be his, in a community where he is regarded as a joke, married to a woman whose every relationship seems to end in recrimination, increasingly estranged from a family that, whatever its flaws, loved him. His father, the king, is battling cancer. His brother has moved on. His niece and nephews are growing up without knowing him. The institution he was born into has closed ranks and carried on, as institutions do. And Harry is in Montecito, in a house he can't renovate, can't sell, and may not own, married to a woman whose grand plan for their post-royal life appears to be unraveling in real time. The Montecito mansion scandal is not ultimately a story about real estate. It is a story about deception. Self-deception primarily. The deception that tells you that you can abandon everything, family, duty, country, identity, and replace it with a Netflix deal and a California zip code. The deception that tells you that image can substitute indefinitely for substance. The deception that tells you that the rules that apply to everyone else, financial gravity, reputational consequences, the fundamental human need for genuine connection, somehow don't apply to you. Meghan Markle built a brand on that deception, and for a while it worked. Her interview, the magazine covers, the carefully staged photographs. The righteous indignation deployed like a weapon against anyone who dared to question the narrative, but deception has a shelf life. And in Montecito, surrounded by people who know what real wealth looks like, who know what real achievement looks like, who know the difference between a homeowner and a houseguest, the shelf life has expired. The carriage is a pumpkin, the glass slipper doesn't fit, and the princess, it turns out, was never a princess at all. She was a duchess, and she gave that up too. The blog was actually rather good, engaging, warm, aspirational in the way that the best lifestyle content is aspirational. It made you feel that the life she was describing was just within reach, provided you made the right choices, bought the right things, cultivated the right attitudes. It was, in retrospect, the prototype for everything that followed, a performance of authenticity, a carefully constructed window into a life that was presented as real, but was in fact as curated and controlled as any royal portrait. The TIG was Meghan's first brand, the Duchess title was her second, and the post-royal independent woman narrative is her third. Each one has followed the same template. Each one has been built on the same foundation of selective disclosure, strategic image management, and the weaponization of personal narrative. And each one, without exception, has eventually collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The TIG was shut down when the royal relationship became public, presumably because a lifestyle blog and a palace don't coexist easily. The Duchess brand imploded in the specific and spectacular manner that we have spent considerable time documenting on this channel. And now the third brand, the independent, thriving post-royal power couple narrative, is crumbling in the hills of Santa Barbara County, in a house that Tyler Perry's financial footprints appear to be all over. Let us be precise about what we know and what we can reasonably infer, because precision matters here. This is not a story that benefits from exaggeration. The facts as they stand are sufficiently extraordinary without embellishment. What we know is this: the Montecito estate, purchased in 2020 for approximately $14.65 million, was acquired through a trust structure. Trust structures are legal and common among wealthy buyers. This is not the issue. The issue is the origin of the funds that capitalized that trust. Tyler Perry's involvement with the Sussexes did not begin and end with the Beverly Hills mansion he provided during their transitional period in early 2020. Financial analysts and investigative journalists who have examined the available documentation have raised persistent and serious questions about whether Perry's financial relationship with the Sussexes extended significantly beyond that initial hospitality arrangement. The paper trail, such as it is available to public scrutiny, suggests a level of financial entanglement that the Sussexes have never publicly acknowledged. Business filings, fund flows, trust documentation, the kind of evidentiary material that doesn't make headlines in celebrity magazines, but that tells a very clear story to anyone who knows how to read it, and the story it appears to tell is this. The Montecito estate was not purchased by Harry and Meghan in any straightforward or independent sense. It was acquired through a financial structure in which the Sussexes may have been far less the principals and far more the beneficiaries. There is, to put it plainly, a meaningful distinction between owning a home and living in a home that someone else owns on your behalf. Harry and Meghan have presented themselves to the world as occupying the former category. The evidence increasingly suggests the latter. And now, with Harry reportedly attempting to sell the property, the mechanics of that ownership structure are being thrown into sharp and unforgiving relief, because you cannot sell what you do not own. And if the ultimate beneficial ownership of the Montecito estate resides with a trust that was capitalized by funds that didn't originate with the Sussexes themselves, then Harry's ability to simply list the property and pocket the proceeds is considerably more complicated than he may have anticipated. Or perhaps, and this is the more troubling interpretation, he always knew the arrangement. Perhaps the complexity of the sale process isn't a revelation to him at all. Perhaps what's happening now is not Harry discovering a problem, but Harry being unable to resolve a problem that was baked into the arrangement from the very beginning. If you design a golden cage, you should not be surprised when you cannot simply walk out of it. Now, one might ask at this juncture, why would Tyler Perry structure things this way? Why would any benefactor arrange things so that the people they're supposedly helping are not truly independent owners of their own residence? And that is an excellent question. An excellent question that cuts right to the heart of the power dynamics that have defined the Sussex story from its very earliest chapters. Meghan Markle has always attracted powerful benefactors. This is one of her most consistent and notable characteristics. Before Harry, there were other influential figures in her life who opened doors, provided opportunities, made introductions. She has always had a gift, and let's be fair, it is a genuine gift, for making powerful people feel that supporting her is not merely generous but meaningful, important, perhaps even historic. She makes people feel they are participating in something larger than themselves. That by helping Meghan, they are advancing some broader cause, whether that's diversity in Hollywood, the modernization of the monarchy, or the liberation of a brilliant woman from the constraints of an oppressive institution. It is a remarkably effective technique, And it works repeatedly on people who should arguably know better. But benefactors, even generous ones, are not unconditional. They have expectations. They maintain leverage. And the leverage in many cases is the financial arrangement itself. When someone else holds the underlying asset, they hold the power. It's that simple. So Meghan, who has spent her entire adult life strategically deploying charm and narrative to extract support from powerful people, may have found herself in an arrangement that looks like freedom from the outside, but functions like dependency on the inside. Which is, if you think about it, a rather extraordinary echo of the situation she claimed to be escaping when she left the royal family. She said the monarchy was constraining, controlling, that Harry was not free to make his own decisions, that they were trapped by protocol and institutional expectation, and so they left, and they built, or rather they had built for them, a life in California. A life that looks, from the outside, like the ultimate expression of independence and self-determination. But look closer, look at who owns the house, look at who funded the security, look at who brokered the deals. Look at who, when the deals expired or were terminated, was not replaced. The constraints didn't disappear when they left the palace. They just changed hands. And the new hands holding the constraints are considerably less historically accountable than the British monarchy. At least the monarchy was transparent about the nature of the arrangement. Let us now turn to something that has received insufficient attention in the broader media coverage of the Sussex financial situation. And that is the question of what exactly Harry and Meghan have produced in exchange for the extraordinary sums they have been paid, the Netflix deal. Let us examine it properly. $100 million is an extraordinary figure. It is the kind of figure that buys a great deal of goodwill, a great deal of patience, and a great deal of time. Netflix, to their credit, waited. They commissioned. They developed. They gave the Sussexes every opportunity to demonstrate that the investment was justified. What they received in return was a documentary series about Harry and Meghan themselves. The content, stripped of its emotional manipulation and its carefully choreographed vulnerability, was essentially a very expensive home video with historical grievances as the throughline. It was watched, initially in significant numbers. Because people were curious. People wanted to see the spectacle, but spectacle has a very short half-life, and once the spectacle was consumed, once the allegations were digested, the photographs analyzed, the tearful confessions processed, there was nothing left, no ongoing narrative, no expanding universe of content, no evidence that the Sussexes had anything to offer Netflix beyond their own story, told once at great length and considerable self-pity. Netflix has not walked away. Not yet, but the language of a streaming platform that has reduced its visible commitment to a production partnership tells you everything you need to know. The $100 million handshake was a bet on potential. The current silence is the sound of that bet being quietly reassessed. And Spotify, of course, did walk away, explicitly, publicly. With the kind of corporate candor that is almost refreshing in its bluntness. The executive who used the word grifters was not speaking carelessly. That is not the kind of word that escapes from a corporate communications environment without significant internal consensus. When a senior figure at a major technology company uses that specific term about people they were paying $25 million, it represents a considered judgment, a conclusion reached after extended observation. They watched the Sussexes operate for a year, and their conclusion was, grifters. That word should hang over every subsequent discussion of Harry and Meghan's commercial prospects like a weather system, because in the industry they are attempting to conquer, that word travels. It travels in private messages between executives. It travels in the conversations at industry events that the Sussexes are no longer invited to attend. It travels in the deliberations of boards and investment committees when the Sussex name appears on a pitch deck. They are, commercially speaking, increasingly radioactive, and the half-life of that radioactivity is measured not in months but in years. Now consider what this means for the mansion. If your income is declining, if your commercial reputation is damaged, if the deals that were supposed to fund your lifestyle have either ended or underperformed, if your security costs are running at multiple millions per year, If your legal battles, and Harry has pursued litigation with a tenacity that must be costing extraordinary sums, are draining resources, and if the house you are living in is not straightforwardly yours to sell, what exactly is your plan? This is the question that hangs over the Sussexes with increasing urgency. And it is a question that Meghan, for all her tactical intelligence, appears not to have answered. Because her tactical intelligence, and let's grant it, it exists, is short-term. It is focused on the next appearance, the next narrative, the next sympathetic profile in a friendly publication, the next reinvention. She is extraordinarily good at managing the immediate moment. What she appears to lack entirely is strategic depth, the ability to build something durable, the capacity to create value that sustains itself beyond the initial attention economy boost. Consider the evidence. The TIG, a lifestyle brand with genuine potential, was abandoned rather than evolved. The Royal Roll, a platform of literally unparalleled global reach, was discarded for reasons that, examined in retrospect, seem increasingly insufficient. The Spotify relationship, a creative opportunity that most podcasters would sacrifice considerably for, was squandered. The Netflix deal, a chance to build a genuine production legacy, has produced one documentary and a great deal of expensive development that has yet to see the light of day. Everything Meghan touches begins with extraordinary promise and ends with institutional disappointment. And the Montecito mansion, it seems, is following precisely the same arc. It began with extraordinary promise. The photographs were beautiful. The community was prestigious. The narrative was compelling, a liberated couple, building their dream life in the California sunshine, proving the doubters wrong. And now it is ending in institutional disappointment, in whispered conversations among neighbors who find the situation more pitiable than threatening, in financial complexity that prevents even the simple act of selling a house, in renovation plans that existed only as media plants and never as construction projects, in laughs behind closed gates in one of the wealthiest communities in the world. There is one dimension of this story that deserves particular attention, and it is perhaps the most uncomfortable one to discuss. It concerns Harry, not Meghan. Harry, because Meghan, whatever you think of her, and this channel has been consistent and clear about what we think, is at least consistent. She is consistent in her methodology, consistent in her self-presentation, consistent in her inability to accept any version of events that does not position her as the principal victim. She is relentless. She is driven. She is in her particular way committed. Harry is none of those things, and that is in some ways the more tragic story. Here is a man who had something genuinely rare, not the wealth, though that existed, not the title, though that was significant. Something rarer than either of those. He had the love of a nation. Genuine, warm, uncomplicated affection from millions of people who saw in him something real. The boy who lost his mother, the soldier who served honestly, the prince who seemed to be beneath the protocol and the ceremony, a decent and fundamentally good human being. People loved Harry, really loved him. Not the institution he represented, not the crown he wore, but him, the person, and he gave that up. He gave it up willingly, and he gave it up in the manner of a man who had been convinced that what he was giving up was less valuable than what he was gaining. He was wrong. And the evidence of how wrong he was is accumulating with every passing month. The money is declining. The deals are drying up. The house may not be his. The community regards him with amusement rather than respect. His family, the family he accused of racism, of neglect, of institutional cruelty, has moved on without him. His father, who by all accounts loves him despite everything, is fighting a serious illness and doing so without his younger son at his side. And Harry is in Montecito, trying to sell a house he may not own, living a life that was supposed to be the reward for everything he sacrificed. And finding, as so many people find when they reach the destination they were promised, that the destination is not what was advertised. The Sussex brand promised liberation. It delivered dependency. It promised wealth. It delivered financial complexity and declining commercial prospects. It promised community. It delivered social isolation in a zip code they can barely afford. It promised Harry a partner who would protect him. It delivered a partner who has consistently used him as narrative material, as proof of authenticity, as evidence of sacrifice. Harry is not a villain in this story. He is something more poignant than that. He is a man who was persuaded that love required him to give up everything, and who is now discovering in the harsh light of California reality that the everything he gave up was worth considerably more than what he received in return. The Montecito mansion is not just a property. It is a monument to that miscalculation. A $16 million monument built on someone else's money, maintained at considerable ongoing cost, and now apparently impossible to sell without the cooperation of parties whose involvement the Sussexes have never publicly acknowledged. It is, in the most literal possible sense, a house built on someone else's foundation, which means it was never in any meaningful sense theirs. And that, when you strip away the Instagram photographs and the Netflix documentaries and the carefully worded statements from unnamed spokespersons, is the essential truth of the Sussex story. It was never really theirs, not the independence, not the wealth, not the commercial success, not the adoring American public that was supposed to replace the British one they alienated, not the Hollywood establishment that was supposed to embrace them as equals. Not the Montecito mansion that was supposed to prove they had made it. None of it was ever really theirs, because you cannot build something real on a foundation of performance. You cannot sustain something authentic through perpetual reinvention. And you cannot make a home in a house that someone else owns. He is charming. He is earnest. He is, in the estimation of virtually everyone who encountered him professionally during this period, a fundamentally decent human being doing his genuine best in a situation of extraordinary complexity. He is also, and this is important, lonely. And loneliness in a person of Harry's particular emotional profile is a vulnerability. Not a weakness, let's be careful about that distinction, but a vulnerability. A place where the armor is thinner, where the defenses are lower. Where someone who knows how to read people, and who is skilled at positioning themselves as the answer to an unspoken question, can find a way in. Enter Meghan Markle. Now, I want to be precise here, because precision is everything in a story like this one. I am not suggesting that Meghan's initial attraction to Harry was purely strategic. I am not suggesting that there was no genuine feeling involved. Human emotion is complicated, and even people who are fundamentally calculating are capable of genuine feeling. What I am suggesting is that Meghan Markle, by the time she encountered Harry, had spent her entire adult life developing a very specific skill set, the skill of reading a room, the skill of identifying what a powerful person needs and positioning herself as the person who can provide it, the skill of constructing a version of herself that is tailored, with remarkable precision, to the desires and expectations of whoever she's trying to impress. She had done it in Hollywood. She had done it in her first marriage. She had done it with the lifestyle brand and the social media presence and the carefully cultivated network of influential friendships. And she did it with Harry. She gave him what he needed: warmth, directness, the sense that she saw him not as a prince but as a person. The feeling intoxicating for someone who had spent his entire life being seen primarily as an institution, of being truly, completely, unconditionally known. Whether or not that feeling was manufactured, it was effective. And Harry, lonely and emotionally vulnerable, and perhaps not entirely equipped by his upbringing to distinguish between genuine intimacy and a highly sophisticated performance of it, was swept away. We know the rest of that story. We have covered it extensively. The wedding, the initial public enthusiasm, the gradual deterioration of palace relationships, the opera interview, the departure, the California chapter. But what we have not fully examined, what today's discussion is specifically designed to address, is the financial architecture of the California chapter, because it is in the financial architecture that the truth lives, not in the interviews, not in the Netflix documentaries, not in the carefully worded public statements. In the money, follow the money. It has never, in the entire history of investigative journalism, failed to tell the truth. Tyler Perry entered the Sussex story in early 2020. The timing is significant. This was the period immediately following the announcement of their departure from royal duties, the period that has come to be known, with the kind of tabloid efficiency that actually captures something true, as Megxit. The Sussexes had made their announcement. They had negotiated, painfully and publicly, the terms of their exit. They had departed for Canada. And then when it became clear that Canada was not going to be a long-term solution, partly for security reasons, partly for financial reasons, and partly because Canada, charming as it is, was not going to provide the specific kind of celebrity infrastructure that Meghan's vision for their future required, they moved to the United States, specifically to Los Angeles, specifically to Tyler Perry's mansion. Now here is where I want to slow down and ask a question that, remarkably, very few mainstream journalists have asked with any real persistence. Why Tyler Perry? Not why did someone offer to help? That's understandable. Harry and Meghan were in a genuinely precarious situation. They had departed the royal fold without a fully formed plan, without established income streams, and without the kind of support infrastructure that royal life had always provided. They needed help. But why Tyler Perry specifically? Why not one of the many other wealthy and influential figures in Meghan's Hollywood network? Why not someone she had known for years, with whom she had an established relationship built on genuine mutual affection and shared history? Why the man whose professional and social connection to Meghan was, by most accounts, relatively new and relatively thin? The answer, when you look at it clearly, has less to do with friendship than with function. Tyler Perry had something that most of Meghan's more established Hollywood connections did not. He had a very specific combination of assets: a large, private, secure property, a personal security apparatus, and crucially, a financial structure, a business empire built on full ownership of his studio, his productions, his intellectual property, that gave him the flexibility to make significant financial commitments without the kind of board approval or shareholder scrutiny that would apply to a publicly traded company. In other words, Tyler Perry could move money quietly. He could make arrangements that didn't need to be disclosed, debated, or approved by anyone other than himself. And this, when you understand it, illuminates the subsequent Montecito purchase in a way that public reporting has consistently failed to do. The Montecito estate was not purchased the way most $16 million properties are purchased. It was not a straightforward transaction in which a buyer presents funds, a seller accepts them, and title transfers cleanly and transparently. The trust structure through which the purchase was made is, on examination, more complex than the standard privacy-motivated trust that celebrity buyers routinely employ. The capitalization of that trust, the source of the funds that actually made the purchase possible, is where the questions become genuinely serious. And the documentary evidence that has emerged, including financial filings and business records associated with entities connected to Tyler Perry, points in a direction that the Sussexes have never addressed, and one suspects would very much prefer to leave unexamined. It points toward a conclusion that Tyler Perry's involvement in the Montecito purchase was not limited to the transitional hospitality he provided in Beverly Hills. It points toward a conclusion that his financial fingerprints are on the mansion itself, that he is not merely the man who gave them a place to stay while they figured things out, but the man who, in some meaningful financial sense, gave them the place they eventually stayed. If this is accurate, and the evidence is sufficiently compelling that the burden of proof has shifted to the Sussexes to demonstrate otherwise, then the implications are profound. It means that the narrative of independent post-royal success was false from the moment it was constructed. It means that the Architectural Digest photoshoot, the Zoom calls with world leaders conducted from the carefully styled library, the casual references to their Montecito home as though it were as straightforwardly theirs as anyone's home is theirs. All of it was built on a foundation that belonged, in some meaningful sense, to someone else. It means that when Meghan sat in that house and told the world she had walked away from everything and built something real and authentic and genuinely hers, she was sitting in someone else's house, and now Harry is trying to sell it, Let us examine the sale attempt because it is perhaps the most revealing single data point in this entire story. When a person decides to sell their home, the process is straightforward. You instruct an estate agent, you agree a listing price, you manage viewings. You accept an offer, you complete the legal process. You receive the proceeds. The end. This process requires one fundamental prerequisite. You must own the home you are attempting to sell. Reports have now emerged that Harry's attempts to move forward with a sale of the Montecito property have encountered complications that go beyond the ordinary friction of high-end real estate transactions. The complications are structural. They relate to the ownership architecture of the property itself. They require the involvement and agreement of parties who are not Harry, and who have interests in the property that may not align perfectly with Harry's desire for a clean, quick, profitable sale. In plain language, he cannot simply sell the house, because the house is not simply his. Now imagine that situation for a moment. Not from a financial analysis perspective, but from a human one. You are Prince Henry Charles Albert David. You were born into one of the most powerful families in human history. You held a military commission. You served your country. You were fifth in line to the throne of the United Kingdom. You had, by virtue of birth, a status and security that most human beings on earth could not have imagined, and you gave it all up. You gave it up for freedom, for love, for the chance to build something of your own on your own terms in your own name. And now you are in California trying to sell a house, and you cannot, because it turns out that the house that was supposed to represent your freedom and your independence and your authentic new life belongs in some significant measure to someone else. The freedom you chose looks, from this angle, remarkably like a different kind of cage. The difference being that the gilded cage of the monarchy came with history, with purpose, with the love of a nation, and with a father who was always in your corner regardless of the difficulties between you. Montecito comes with a trust document, a complicated financial arrangement, and a wife who is already, by all available indications, planning the next reinvention. We should speak about the reinvention, because it is already underway. Meghan Markle does not do stagnation. She does not do failure, not in the sense of acknowledging it, processing it, learning from it in the visible, human way that failure usually demands. What she does instead is reframe. She takes the failure and she recontextualizes it as a stepping stone, a lesson, a necessary phase of a journey that is always in her telling, heading somewhere magnificent. The TIG didn't fail, she chose to close it so she could embrace a bigger destiny. The royal role didn't implode, she sacrificed it for her mental health and her family's safety. Spotify didn't terminate the deal, she outgrew the format. Netflix hasn't renewed the production partnership with enthusiasm, she is pivoting to more meaningful projects. And Montecito will be reframed. Watch for it. When the narrative around the mansion becomes impossible to sustain, when the truth about the ownership, the renovations that never happened, the sale that cannot be completed, becomes too widely known to ignore, Meghan will reframe it. She will talk about the importance of being unencumbered by material possessions. She will reference her children's need for a different environment. She will hint, with the practiced vagueness that is her signature rhetorical mode, at undisclosed pressures that made the situation untenable. She will make the departure from Montecito, if departure comes, seem like a choice. A conscious, deliberate, spiritually motivated choice. And a certain portion of her audience will believe her, because they always do, because she is very, very good at this. But in Montecito itself, in the community that has watched the performance up close, that has seen the unstaffed grounds and the postponed renovations and the fluctuating security arrangements, and the social dynamics of a couple who arrived with extraordinary fanfare and have gradually, quietly, become a source of private amusement rather than genuine respect. In Montecito, no one is being fooled. The neighbors know. With the particular devastating clarity of people who have no need to be impressed and no incentive to pretend, they know. They know the difference between wealth and the performance of wealth. They know the difference between someone who belongs in their community because they have genuinely earned their place there, and someone who is borrowing the postcode like a costume. and they have concluded, quietly but with remarkable consistency, that the Sussexes fall into the latter category. This is perhaps the most stinging indictment of all, not the Spotify comments, not the declining Netflix visibility, not the legal battles or the stalled renovations or the complicated sale process. The fact that in the community they chose as the stage for their grand post-royal life, the community that was supposed to confer upon them the legitimacy and social acceptance that the British establishment had denied them, they have become, in the most precise and cutting sense of the word, a joke. People do not fear the Sussexes in Montecito. They do not resent them. They do not regard them with the kind of complicated mixture of admiration and irritation that genuine power tends to generate. They find them funny. And there is nothing in the entire taxonomy of social humiliation quite as devastating as being found funny by people you desperately want to impress. We return, as we must, to the question of Harry. Because Harry deserves a more nuanced examination than he typically receives, either from those who lionize him as a victim of institutional cruelty, or those who dismiss him as a willing accomplice in his own destruction. The truth is more complicated and more sympathetic than either of those framings allows. Harry is, by all credible accounts, a man in genuine psychological pain. Not performed pain, not the kind of strategically deployed vulnerability that characterizes Meghan's public presentations of suffering. Real pain. The pain of a man who has lost almost everything that once gave his life meaning and coherence, and who is beginning, perhaps, to understand the dimensions of what he has lost. He has lost his family. Not entirely, the doors are not permanently sealed, and his father in particular has made clear that love persists regardless of circumstance. But the relationships are damaged in ways that will take years, if they can be repaired at all, and which require from Harry a kind of acknowledgement and accountability that, while he remains under Meghan's influence, may be impossible to access. He has lost his country. Not the geography he can visit and does. But England is not simply a geography for Harry. It is an identity. It is the place where he knows who he is, where his history lives, where the grave of people he loved attended. And he experiences that place now as a visitor. A controversial visitor, regarded with complicated feelings by a public that once loved him simply, and now struggles to locate the person it loved beneath the layers of grievance and recrimination. He has lost his purpose. This may be the most damaging loss of all. Harry in the military was a man who knew exactly what he was for. Harry on royal duties, visiting veterans, supporting mental health causes, representing his country, was a man whose role was clear and whose contribution was genuine and appreciated. Harry in Montecito is a man who has described himself, in various interviews, in terms that reveal a profound absence of purpose. He fills his days. He does not appear to inhabit them. And now he is trying to sell a house that may not be his. Because the money is running out, or the arrangement has become untenable, or both. And when the house is gone, if it can be sold, what remains? What is the plan? This is the question that nobody in the Sussex camp appears to have an answer for. And the reason nobody has an answer is that the plan, such as it ever was always Meghan's. And Meghan's plans are tactical, not strategic. They address the immediate horizon, not the destination. The destination, it turns out, was never properly mapped. You cannot build a life on a brand. You cannot sustain a family on a narrative. You cannot replace community with publicity, or love with strategic alliance, or purpose with podcast revenue. These are not revolutionary insights. They are among the oldest and most obvious truths in human experience. They are the things that most people understand through the ordinary accumulation of life experience. By the time they reach middle age, Harry and Meghan are in middle age. And they are learning these truths the hard way, in a house they may not own, in a community that finds them funny, in a country that is not their country, having abandoned the lives they were born to in pursuit of a vision that was always more Meghan's than Harry's, and that has delivered, consistently and with increasing clarity, considerably less than it promised. The mansion in Montecito is not simply a real estate problem. It is a metaphor that has become literal.
Please don't forget to subscribe to our The King YouTube channel to get more updates in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a lovely evening. And, we'll be back to see you tomorrow. Bye. I love you all.